what I will be talking about for this evening, I will do a commentary about an article by Nonaka and Takeuchi entitled The Wise Leader. It's an article that was released back in May 2011 in the Harvard Business Review. So I know I've given a copy of that article in our Canvas LMS, so feel free to download it and read the full article on your own. And for tonight, I will just share the key message that is taken from the article. What you will find in the article that I will not talk about tonight would be the anecdotes, the stories that help reinforce the ideas that Nonaka and Takeuchi presented in the article. So, aside from just listening to me and taking note of my commentary, it might be good also that you read the full article by Nonaka and Takeuchi. Now, another thing that you'd like to bear in mind as you're going through this article and as you're listening to my commentary is that Nonaka and Takeuchi, they're actually known for the concept of tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, which would have been one of the foundations of knowledge management theory. Excuse me. So how knowledge management was built. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So how knowledge management was built over time was that they proposed the idea that in any organization you have two types of knowledge that's floating around, so to speak. Okay, that would be explicit knowledge, knowledge that is codified in certain artifacts of the organization, and there's tacit knowledge, knowledge that somehow you know the collective organization knows, but you can't find any specific evidence of that specific knowledge, and you call that tacit knowledge. Okay. Now, in this article, Nonaka and Takeuchi builds on that, rather extends the idea of tacit knowledge and explicit knowledge, and adds something on top of that, which we will see in a little while. Excuse me again. Okay, so from knowledge, well, business now demands a different kind of leader, one who will make decisions knowing that the outcomes must be good for society as well as the company. Uh, in this sentence, you can see that in any organization, you'd like your leader, you'd like your ultimate boss to make decisions about the organization that is, well, as you can see, a bit ethical. Well, not just a bit ethical, but really ethical. Something that is good for the company, yes, and it is also good for the society at large, okay, or humanity at large, if you can call it that way. And in this sense, leaders must keep a higher purpose in mind. Nowadays, this doesn't seem to be an issue. You hear a lot of business leaders reflecting and saying that their organizations have a higher purpose. Okay, especially if these organizations, if these companies have been known to be for profit for many years, many decades. Now they're just reinforcing the fact that they have something in their mission that transcends above and beyond earning money. Okay. Now, although such leadership demands more knowledge than ever, okay, these same leaders should not depend on just explicit and tacit knowledge. So take note that the framing of the problem right now is no longer about what the company should do operationally. It is perhaps something similar to how organizations would think about uh, finding their soul, right? Companies finding their soul. And it goes beyond just knowledge. whether it's tacit or explicit. And in this case, there is also a need for a third kind of knowledge, which is often forgotten. And the technical term for that is phronesis, or in simple terms, practical wisdom. Now, you might have heard of the difference or how knowledge and wisdom would be differentiated. Okay. So, definitely, when we think of knowledge, knowledge is theoretically or conceptually better than just simple information. And we know that information is processed data. So it's not enough that we have data, it's much more important that that data translates into information that is useful, perhaps at the transactional level or even beyond that. And later on, you have these pools of information. When you collect them, they build your knowledge. Of course, that was the in thing back in as early as the 70s or 80s. And then later on in the 90s, uh, the discussion of knowledge came into the picture. But then you realize, excuse me, you realize, and this is something that is is noticed in human experience, is that knowledge is not enough. We get that sense, and we realize that in human life, okay, more than knowledge, we require wisdom. Now, there's a lot of uh, definitions or categories for wisdom. But in the case of the authors, for Nonaka and Takeuchi, they're looking at a type of wisdom that is called practical wisdom, something that is useful for the organization. Okay. Now, there are other types of wisdom, like esoteric wisdom or metaphysical wisdom. Uh, and if you go to the roots of Greek philosophy, there are different types of wisdom. Okay, but in the case of businesses, and at least what Nonaka and Takeuchi is focusing on is the fact that there is wisdom that is still important to businesses, to organizations nowadays, and you call that phronesis or practical wisdom. Now, phronesis, it's acquired from experience. uh, Definitely it's something that is not easily acquired through lectures or acquired through people narrating things to other people. Okay, that will help. Okay, practical wisdom can be imparted through those means, but it's more than that. Okay, uh, it requires experience, a certain amount of collective experience, or maybe not collective, but an agglomeration of the experiences of the different people within the organization. Okay. That is what would comprise your practical wisdom, okay, or phronesis. And we know that this practical wisdom enables people to do what? Well, two objectives or two immediate objectives: to make prudent judgments, okay, in a timely fashion. So it's not enough that you get the right answer. You have to get the right answer uh, as quickly as possible. Okay. And to take actions guided by values and morals. So it's not enough that you know the answer, you also have to execute the answer. Okay, and that's important. And that is what would separate a knowledgeable person from a wise person. Or taking the cue from the title, this would separate a knowledgeable person or knowledgeable leader from a wise leader. That leader knowing, arriving at the right answer at the right time and taking action immediately as well. Okay. Now, the article goes and discusses six qualities of a wise leader. Okay, and we'll go through them one by one. And the first quality is that wise leaders can judge goodness. So the important aspect of the leader, at least they're putting this at number one, is that that leader has to be discerning. That leader should be prudent. That leader, if that leader is to be considered wise, should know what is good. Okay. Now, there are four ways of cultivating the ability to make judgment about goodness. Okay. And definitely, from our own experiences, we would have an idea or an inkling on how wise leaders can actually acquire criteria for goodness. But the article would give us some tips on how you can actually acquire or cultivate this ability eventually if you plan to become a wise leader, right? So the first is experience. I mean, that's already alluded to earlier. Okay, but not just any experience. It has to be uh, an experience with a certain level of quality. Okay, noted particularly by you or that person facing adversity or failure. So if you think about it, when we hear these nuggets of advice from people, especially about seasoned leaders when it comes to entrepreneurs or startups, they always put a premium on failure. Like they're encouraging people not to be scared of failure, and the likes. But it's not about failure per se that is important in this case, but rather learning from the failure. That's what's important. Okay? And by going through failure and learning from it, you actually gain experience. Uh, at other times, I may have said this already, is that good judgment is supposed to be forged from bad judgment. Okay, and that's how it is. I mean, a wise leader is not somebody who sits down in class and aces all the exams. Okay? But he or she is someone who has gone through the experience, gone through it himself or herself, okay, experienced difficulty, and even having to fail in some of those instances and learning from those instances. That is what would build uh, eventually that person to become a wise leader. Now, another way of cultivating this ability to discern goodness is, well, of course, you write down, you take notes, write down principles drawn from life experiences, and even sharing them. Okay. Now we'll talk more about the sharing part in the later qualities, right? But what's important here is when you arrive at an insight on what you think is a very useful principle moving forward, it's important to write it down. In fact, some people, and this is a forgotten advice, right? Some experts would say that leaders, if you want to become an effective leader, you should learn how to journal, write down notes, okay, or do a diary for yourself, right? And it's not because you'd be thinking as how teenagers would treat journals or diaries, okay, with all the sentimentality behind it, and the kilig, as they say. No, I mean, the reason why leaders are encouraged to write down a diary or a journal is precisely because this is where they can review whatever it is that happened to them. You see, in a typical day, a leader makes a lot of decisions. Some of them very plain, very straightforward, perhaps recurring, has already happened in the past. But nevertheless, you don't want to miss out opportunities to learn from those decisions that may become instructive in the future. At that point in time, you cannot make that determination, but it's good to write things down. And that's one way for you to cultivate uh, the ability to make judgments, okay, on what is good. Okay. Now, another way or another method to build that discerning attitude is having that sense of initiative to keep on doing what is excellent, the relentless pursuit of excellence. Now, this is the opposite of just staying mediocre or just hitting things in a checklist, like having that attitude of compliance. Uh, well, that's not the case. Okay, if you really want to discern what is good, well, you need to have that interior desire to do what is excellent and to push forward. Okay, to always run after that. But it's not enough that you try and go and you stay bookish. You probably have an idea based on a checklist on what is good and what is not, and then you stick to that. Okay, I don't know. Okay? You always need to have that desire to keep on studying, to keep on learning from the experiences of other people, and you yourself that discipline to not stay contented with what you've accomplished so far, especially if you feel that you've actually accomplished something already. Well, it's important that you try your best to keep on pushing yourself forward. Okay, making sure that you're able to to achieve a higher goal, okay, or higher place than you were before. Okay, and the last way, well, this is also becoming well versed in the liberal arts, and this is quite interesting because there are a lot of experiences, a lot of examples where leaders, especially in the field of technology, we know them to be quite well versed in the liberal arts. Okay, I'll just name one example: Steve Jobs. Okay, he was a very good design person, but because his formation wasn't really on technology, wasn't about being an engineer. Okay, he was actually to the arts, believe it or not, and his liberal arts training actually helped him become a broader leader in the field of information technology. And I would say that it's never too late for anybody, especially us, to try to be well versed in the liberal arts. Okay. So these are the four ways on how you can actually discern what is good or have that criteria for goodness. And that's just the first of the six qualities of a wise leader. Now, what's the second quality? Well, a wise leader, can grasp the essence. Now, what do we mean by grasping the essence? Okay, we might have an inkling on what this is, but uh, in a nutshell, loosely, this means quickly sensing what lies behind the situation. So you see the situation, okay, and then you try to see, okay, what's underneath it. I pop up the hood. What's underneath all of it? Okay, what's behind it? Okay, what's the core? Okay, so that's what is loosely meant. Okay, by grasping the essence. Okay, or really trying to strip everything of its cosmetic attributes and really looking at its basic nature. Okay, so to speak. And by grasping the essence, this also means that we are able to determine universal, perhaps abstract truths versus things that are particular or in the details. So you can differentiate that. You know what is the 10,000 foot view versus the nitty gritty details around it. Okay? A wise leader is comfortable identifying what is 10,000 foot view and what is really uh, immersed in the details. Now, there are three ways on how a wise leader can actually cultivate the ability to grasp the essence. It's not going to be easy, but we'll see in a while what are these three ways. Well, the first one is relentlessly asking the basis of a problem or a situation. Nowadays, the literature would call this reframing. So knowing what frame to use in a particular situation or a particular problem. You may have encountered a lot of recent advice regarding problem formulation. So it's not about learning or it's not about just coming up with a question and that's it, or coming up with an initial statement of the problem and that's it. It's really going deeper and challenging yourself, challenging the assumptions behind the initial problem that you have. okay, and then pursuing that line of thinking eventually. But it has to be relentless. You really have to challenge yourself to say, is this the problem, or is there a better problem that I need to consider? So that's one. The second way is learning to see the trees and the forest at the same time. Said a while ago, you have to be comfortable with looking at the 10,000 foot view and the details underneath. And you should be able to do it at the same time. Of course, that will take some practice, that will take perhaps a little bit of trial and error, but these wise leaders, they can comfortably take a look at the 10,000 foot view and they can see the details immediately. And lastly, okay, the last way to cultivate this ability to grasp the essence is constructing and testing hypotheses. Okay. Um, in fact, this is something that is put into the forefront again. You see, this article was written 10 years ago. Okay. But the lessons that we see right now, formulating the problem well, testing, constructing hypotheses, this is something that we're hearing again in leadership literature. Okay? And if you've noticed, when you test hypotheses, there's that possibility that you could be wrong. It can lead to failure. And then, based on the earlier quality, we said that you have to be someone with quite an amount of experience, especially experience that is steep in failures also. Okay? So this is quite important as well. But it's not easy. It's not something that you pick up a book like a checklist. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. No, it's not like that. Okay. So these are the three ways on how you can cultivate the ability to grasp the essence. Okay. Now the third quality of a wise leader is that wise leaders create shared contexts. Now shared context, this can mean a place, a space, or field, an environment. Okay. Wise leaders understand that uh, they don't operate like as if floating in the air. Okay. In a way, wise leaders are grounded. They're grounded to what? They're grounded to a shared context, which is a place, a space, or a field, which cultivates or promotes a shared sense of purpose. If other people cannot seem to share your context, then it's so difficult for them eventually to do what you're going to ask them to do. On the other hand, if you do have a shared context and you can nurture that shared context, okay, then everybody would have something common to hang on to. Okay? They will always rally back to that commonality. And this is what builds everybody's shared sense of purpose. Now, how do we create this shared context? Okay, what are the ways? Well, one way is doing it top down. In other words, the leader himself or herself would create and establish, okay, this is our shared context. That can work typically in some cases, like in the case of crisis, or in the case of something new. If you're a newly formed company, newly formed organization, well, top down is typically the better approach in building this shared context. But another way of doing it is bottom up. The people themselves, okay, creating that shared context. Okay, and wise leaders know how to operate behind the scenes, wherein eventually when they leave these people alone, the shared context will be built by these same people. Okay. Top down is a little bit more directive. Okay, it's the leader who really institutes, very commanding. Okay, creates that shared context. But bottom up is a little bit more nuanced. There's a little bit of an art into it. Okay, and the leader must know how to step back and observe from the sidelines. And once in a while would create nudges here and there, not very direct, but enough to move everybody towards a certain target or a certain location. You can think of this like shepherding dogs. So if they have to herd a flock of sheep, right? I mean, they want this flock to move from point A to point B. They're not going to drag each and every sheep from A to B. They'll be so calculating that They'll run to a certain portion, they'll bark, and then the flock will already move to another direction. And then later on, the dog will actually go to the other position, bark again, and then move to another direction. Something similar. Okay, a wise leader, if he really wants, if he or she would want to do a bottom-up approach in creating that shared context, he'd be like a shepherding dog, right? Once in a while, inserting a little bit of intervention, but it's not really too overbearing. Now, what are other ways, okay, or the other qualities rather? Well, the fourth quality here is that the wise leader knows how to communicate the essence. And on the matter of communication, I will not really explain at length too much, but the whole point by the authors here is that the wise leader, in order to communicate the essence, must be a good storyteller. And we perhaps heard about this, okay? How storytelling is a very important trait or asset in leadership. So, how does a wise leader communicate the essence? Well, through stories, through metaphors, through other figurative language. And this is the reason why it's important that the wise leader would have an idea of the liberal arts. Okay? Without the liberal arts, then it will be very difficult for this wise leader to come up with stories or metaphors or any other figurative language. But the idea here is that you're not just saying stories or metaphors for the sake of sharing a story or a metaphor. No, the purpose there is that you want to be able to visually or viscerally construct the relationship. Okay? In more technical terms, you want to provide the analogy. Okay? You want to impart analogical knowledge. Okay? Because it is through the stories, through the metaphors, that you are able to establish the relationships and see and appreciate them for what it is. And what type of relationship? Well, the relationship of one to another. It could be relationships of persons. It could be relationships of things. It could be relationships of time, past and future and present. Okay? But the reason why, at the heart of it, the reason why you'd want to use stories and metaphors is because you want to be able to communicate the relationship. You want to make the connection. And that is what would motivate or animate people to do what you'd want them to do. They need to see the connection, right? If they can't see the connection, they can't grasp it. They will not be able to see what you see. Okay? And that's a waste. Okay? It's quite a shame. You have a very, very nice idea, but you can't really communicate it to other people. Okay. Um, it's not going to be effective. Okay. And yeah, you're in the end, it will just be a waste of time for everyone. So it's very, very important that not only can you know the forest from the trees, look at it simultaneously, but you need to be able to communicate that to other people in quite a facilitated manner. Okay. And this goes without saying, the fifth quality, wise leaders exercise political power. Okay, so, and by political power, we mean, in a simple, easy sense, bringing people together and spurring them to act. You can replace the term political power with influence. Okay, it need not be the dirty term that comes to mind when we think of politics. Right? It can be just moving people or influencing them to do something. Okay, that's politics. That's political power, and wise leaders know when to use that. Okay, and one way for these wise leaders to be effective in the use of this political power or of influence is that they are able to understand the viewpoints and emotions of other people. That's the pitfall for most leaders. And what makes them not really wise leaders is the fact that they ignore or they dismiss the fact that others are also intelligent human beings. They have their own perspectives, and there are a lot of emotions at play. Okay. And it's not enough that you try to explain things to people in a coldly logical manner. Eventually, you'll realize it wouldn't work. Yes, you are correct. Perhaps you are accurate in what you're saying when you try to explain things in a logical manner, but did you actually get them to buy into your idea? Will they actually do the things that you want them to do? Maybe at the start, but there's going to be a brewing discontent. Eventually, if they had it, they'll probably come up with a revolt, okay, or mutiny, which you wouldn't want, in any case, right? So there's that idea that, okay, you have to learn also how to dance with them. Okay, in fact, that's a good metaphor. Dancing, political power, influence like dancing with people. You can't always force yourself to do the steps. You have to also feel your partner out, glide them through the motions, listen to the music, right? And it takes practice. It's not going to be a formula or recipe that you follow and out comes the conclusion. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So that's how wise leaders exercise political power. They know the other person very well. And they keep these things in mind when they deal with the other person. Now, for the last quality of a wise leader is that wise leaders foster practical wisdom in others. So they're not selfish, simply put. They know that they need to impart this to other people. Okay. And this is what is known as distributed phronesis. Okay. So you want this practical wisdom to be shared with other people. And these other people would build on that. And then they'll share it with other people in the process. In the end, distributed phronesis is something similar to institutional wisdom or the wisdom of a company. So in that sense, it's like if you're going to personalize a company, right? You give it life. You treat it as if it were a human person. The wisdom of that company is actually based on what is now called the distributed phronesis across different people, across different leaders in that organization. A wise leader would know how to make other wise leaders. So that's important. Okay. Now, how do we foster practical wisdom in others? Well, modeling. Okay, we observe an exemplar's behavior, and that's why it's important that for us as leaders, we have to be very sensitive with how we act, the actuations of our behaviors. Okay, because other people will look at us. Okay, as they say, when you're growing up, you learn things faster from what you see versus what you hear. So it's not enough that you tell them, okay, here's what you do, okay, but they see something else. So there's going to be a conflict internally to them. They'll say, why is it that this person is saying this, but I see the same person doing something else, right? In other words, another simple term here is good example. In order for us to be able to foster practical wisdom in others, we have to show good example. Okay. Now, another way of fostering practical wisdom in others, this is a little bit more structured, is having that formal system of apprenticeship. So in an organization, perhaps there are some structured programs like a mentoring program, okay, or a program wherein something similar to a young leaders program or young executive program. Okay. Normally, they gather a group of people together. These are people identified to be the next generation of leaders in that organization, and they come up with something structured, typically like a corporate university or something similar to a succession planning program. Okay, so these are normally things that can be done. Well, at the root of the term apprenticeship, if you recall how it was in the medieval times when you have tradesmen, okay, when they try to share their craft to other people, let's say artisans or sculptors. The only way that they can share this knowledge to other people is by taking on apprentices, and that's how apprenticeship works in its historical root. Okay? So in that same way, having a formal system of apprenticeship, these wise leaders can probably take on, let's say, appointed heirs, maybe 2 or 3 people. You have these 2 or 3 people work with you, okay, make you You have these people go with you, observe you, shadow you wherever you go, all the meetings, all the activities. You even make this two or three people do a little bit of the things that you yourself would do, right? So that's one way of doing apprenticeship in today's context. But the idea there is that it's either you show good example, okay, being a good example to the others, or you let certain select people to do some of the things that you're already doing, and with you observing and guiding them along the way. Now, in conclusion, when we try to learn about technology and well, we know that knowledge is important. Okay? And initially, we might be thinking that we have to be an organization that creates knowledge. That's very important in the field of technology. But more than that, the authors are saying that it shouldn't just be limited to knowledge creation. Okay, it should transform, it should transcend into something that is a company that is wisdom practicing. Okay? Knowledge transcending to wisdom. Okay, that's the next step. Okay, is that the final step in the evolution of a company? Perhaps. Okay, but definitely, based on the article, we know that there can still be one more step higher than just simply generating knowledge. So it's not enough that you come up with a very robust knowledge management system. You're able to track all of the issues, all of the suggestions, coming up with healthy knowledge bases, perhaps, in that company. Well, you want to make sure that these sets of knowledge, they are actually transformed into something that can be considered as wisdom. Okay. And here, the reason why you'd want companies to transcend from knowledge to wisdom is that this is what's important in the future. And companies can create futures, new futures, because we know and we see it that that's so essential for our survival. We've seen a lot of companies grow complacent. They've been successful now, but they've not really transcended in understanding and appreciating the wisdom of things, which is why later on they lose out the competition. They lose out jumping on the next stage. Okay, and as we said earlier, the best way for us to predict the future is to invent it, right? So that's how we can ensure that we can survive if we can create our future now. But that would require transcending from just simply utilizing knowledge to really actualizing it as wisdom for the organization. Now, those futures can no longer be extensions of the past. Okay. Or in another way, we can't just simply try to predict the future in a dispassionate sense or in a detached sense. Okay. We have to be committed. We have to go all in. Okay. And committing to say, okay, this is how we're going to stake ourselves in the future. But for us to do that safely, for us to do that in a more beneficial manner, we have to exercise the wisdom that's required of it. Okay, and convert that into what is known in this case as leaps of faith into tomorrow. Now, what about the leaders? Okay, so we've seen that organizations, well, we have to be not just knowledge creating, but we also have to be wisdom practicing. What about the leaders? Okay, well, leaders must also be pragmatic. Okay. Uh, but more than being pragmatic, uh, they have to be what is known as idealistic pragmatists. You can see that tension, right? Sometimes you might think that if a person is an idealist, his head is always above in the clouds, okay, ivory tower thinking, very abstract. That's the typical image that we have of an idealist. Whereas a practical person, very concrete, doesn't really care about truths, perhaps, always concerned about the here and now. I don't care about the past, it's already done. I don't care about the future, it may not come. Well, the authors are challenging us to be both. We have to be both an idealist and a pragmatist. But here, the authors are saying you have to be idealistic pragmatists. Okay. Especially in our own organizations. So we have to be pragmatists, but you have to be idealistic pragmatists. which is why they turn to a dual quest. So this is an important term, a dual quest for knowledge and practical wisdom into a way of life. So it's not either or, it's both and. Okay, we have to generate knowledge. Yes, that's going to be useful for us, and we have to convert that into practical wisdom, which would lead us all the way into the future. And with that, I end my commentary on the article by Nonaka and Takeuchi entitled Wise Leader. I'll open the floor for questions if you have any about the article.